Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski. I'll be your host for today, as per usual. And before we start, may I remind you, if you find this podcast useful, entertaining, fascinating, or whatever you find it, and you'd like to share it with the world, then please do send it to a friend maybe, share it on your social media. It helps a lot. It's by far the best kind of advertising there is, and for the time being, all my advertising is organic. And secondly, most importantly, really, I guess it would be great if you can click the follow button, whether it is on your Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you're looking at it. Maybe it's on YouTube. Please do subscribe. It's a great empowerment for me to see how many of you are participating. And of course, it also allows us to reach more people. So if you're interested in that, please do so. Otherwise, if you'd like to support me in any other way, please find the link below to my link tree, where you have all kinds of opportunities to support, or maybe just get in touch and let me know what you think. And thank you so much for all of you that have been in touch with me over the past months. I love your emails. Thank you so much for that. So just wanted to put out there. Now, welcome. This is our, I don't know which one, I think it's season 9 now, or maybe even 10. So I will confirm that for you for the next episode. But I'm very excited to be starting it. As I said before last week, I am preparing a season which is going to be yet again a season around book reviews, book ideas. So for all those bookworms or aspirational bookworms out there, as well as people that just want to have the benefit of insight into some of those books through the lens of what we've talked about again and again. You know the values that this podcast has, and you know the kind of person I am by now, if you've been listening for a while. So you can kind of gauge whether or not these books are for you, right? And sometimes we are a bit busy. Maybe we don't find enough time to read. I would urge you to read the book after you've listened to this episode anyway, but understanding you might not be able to, I've decided to continue with my book reviews episodes, which I find very exciting. Most importantly, I think they allow me to really understand and sort of communicate what I've learned or what I've sort of explored in these books, which is very beneficial. Apparently, the best way to teach yourself things is to first learn them, then put them to practice, and then teach them to others, because this activity of teaching the other allows you to really pushes you to really convey the meaning in your own terms, and that's very powerful. It's much more powerful to rewrite a sentence, to paraphrase it to fit your way of understanding, than to just write word by word, sort of copy-paste, without having the emotional or logical attachment to it. So these are just some fun ideas out there. I've not yet decided what all the books of this season will be, but I thought, knowing what you guys like to listen to and observing how different episodes are being received, I've decided that this season is going to be quite focused. So there might be a few sort of black swans of a book, something unusual, but for the most part I will be focusing around the spiritual and the personal development, I guess, niche of the books. I have some exciting ones as well that I would like to share with you that might be slightly surprising, but we'll get to those, right? So for today, I thought, well, where should I start? How should one start? And after due consideration and a thorough list binding, I've decided that I'll start with a practical one, which might be a good foundation for what is yet to come in this season. So I've been working recently with this amazing book by Stephen Covey called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And just from the start point, I think by far, and I believe I've said it to my friend a few days ago, by far, this book, alongside The Artist Way and Letting Go by David Hawkins, is the most powerful of the sort of practical focused books I've had a chance to encounter. I've been working with it, and this is not an overstatement. I've been working with it through my own things, right? So I will explore in a moment what the book is about, but as a sort of introduction, this is not only a book that you just read and put it back on the shelf. Similarly to The Artist Way or Letting Go, this book has sort of guidance and activities which, if you pursue, will greatly enhance the way you can benefit, I believe, from the book itself, from the wisdom within it. And it is, I think, one of the most popular in terms of the personal development and sort of that niche books. So you might have already heard about it. I wouldn't be surprised. I've listened to it before a couple of years back, but I had it in an audible version, which I think really missed the point, because the width and breadth of activities that this book offers, when you have it especially in paper form, where you can see the tasks and activities and engage with them, or maybe take notes, or like I love highlight different parts, then it actually is a very different experience. And so quite as a classic synchronicity does occur, I've just had a moment recently, a month ago, when I heard someone talking about that book, and I was like, oh yeah, that was an interesting one. Maybe I should give it a try again. And so I bought it. I've read it thoroughly by now, and I've been engaging with these activities, and I will talk about some of them, but for the most part, I want to encourage you to read and engage with it yourself. So don't worry, there will be a few spoilers, but these are not spoilers that would spoil the fun of actually engaging with the book itself. So I hope that's going to be an inspiring idea for you to take forward. So yeah, let's start first and foremost, as an introduction maybe. The way I would describe this book is it's a guide to become better personally and interpersonally. And the structure of the book, these 7 habits that Mr. Covey talks about, actually reflect this journey from self to the outside, and then sort of to become a part of a cycle. So the first 3 habits are focused on the private sort of life, private victories. These are surrounding your philosophy of life, your way of approaching problems, your goal setting and achievement, and ultimately your character traits. I think that's a good way to put it. And in the context of personal development, this part is certainly something that you would do behind closed doors, right? This is the work you do before you go out there and present yourself to the public. Then the next 3 habits are focused on the interpersonal relationships. So these are the public victories, potentially. These may be focused on how to communicate well, how to engage in activities with others that benefit all parties included, and basically how to arrange yourself and your life to fit in the larger scope of the world. And then the final habit, the 7th one, is a sort of reinforcement of all the previous ones. So the habit itself is a sort of reminder that you can always get better and there is always a space to grow. So you should not sort of rest and completely fall back into your old patterns, but rather develop further on each of these areas that you've already explored throughout the habits that you've practiced before. So I will not be reading all the habits for you. I think it's a fair introduction, and I would really urge you to check the book out. I found it very pleasurable, and also it's quite practical. So the chapters themselves are sort of divided into the theory, a bit of practice-based activities, and then also with this new edition, which I guess is a way of celebrating the book's 7th or 8th publication cycle. The son of the author himself has also added some notes at the end of each chapter, which are usually quite practical and sort of up to date a bit more, because you have to remember this book has been around for, I think, over 60 years by now. So it's definitely similarly to How to Win Friends and Influence People or Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. These books are all sometimes slightly outdated in terms of their wording or maybe the example that they give, but the practical and the ideas within them are certainly not outdated, the least. So I think it is fair to say that it's a good book to begin this season with. And finally, just before I go into the ideas from the book, why am I giving you this book to start? I think it is because I felt inspired to begin the season with something that would be more practical to begin with. Because the books that, the works of David Hawkins, into which we will dive in the coming weeks, are definitely not the lightest of reads, and they demand a lot of abstract sort of open-mindedness thinking, whereas they don't really give you the guidance and the practical, which I believe we will all need to delve into David Hawkins's work without getting too tired or sort of too overwhelmed with the magnitude of that material. So this one is a bit of a lighter read, and it's much more practical, and I hope that it will inspire you to take action. And something that I've mentioned last week, that I'm about to start a new chapter in my journey in life, right? I finished my studies, I've submitted my dissertation recently, and I'm gonna go on to a new job from September. I found that it's also a very useful moment, I believe, to rethink some of our models of thinking, our philosophies of life, and our approaches to what we do because of the changing seasons, right? You're about to finish your vacation, potentially. If you're at uni, you probably have one more month maybe of holidays. But if you're in high school or secondary school, you're likely to be coming back to school as I'm going back to work. And so it might be a good moment to review some of those ideas and to rethink some of the ways we do things. So yeah, I hope it's beneficial for you. Anyhow. Okay, so let's start. I'll share with you 3 ideas, okay? I've chosen one habit that I will sort of explore, and I will explain as well why I've chosen this one as in my opinion, the most impactful one to begin with. And I've also chosen to share with you 2 initial chapters, or maybe ideas from 2 first chapters of the book, with them in mind being a good way to start. So, funnily enough, the habit that I will share is the habit number 2, which is begin with the end in mind. And the 2 ideas that I would like to start with is the inside out idea of work and the paradigm or the philosophy idea. And it might ring the bell for some of you already, these words and these, sort of phrases. If it doesn't, it's okay. We'll try to navigate them, and I promise I'll do my best not to make it too complicated and complex myself. So in terms of the inside out and paradigm or the philosophy, this is something I wanted to start with because this is where the book starts. And I think it's an important thing to note. Now, to put it in the context, I know we are living through difficult times. Depending where you are on the globe, you might see more or less sort of unrest in your country or in your area. Certainly the internet and social media are not the most positive spaces these days. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed or just upset with the way things are. And it's easy to jump to conclusions, what could be changed to make things better, right? But something that Jordan Peterson mentions in his book, which is basically the idea that first put your house in order before you criticize the world. In a similar spirit, the idea of inside out work is where we begin. So the idea here is change starts with you. And I understand it might not be easy to consider because sometimes it hurts to admit there is a problem. But a good example of this is, let's say that you've been dating for a while, and even though you manage to find a date every now and then, and maybe you date with someone for a few weeks, months maybe, every now and then it seems like it just stops going. Maybe at some point you sort of grow apart, or you feel like there is a point at which every of your relationships becomes a little bit boring or a little bit tedious, or whatever it is. It's a good measure to assume that you have a part in this problem. Of course, our ego is quick to jump to a conclusion that, if this person doesn't want to date me, then it's their problem, it's something with them. If our relationship didn't work, it's because they did X, Y, Z. The thing is, of course, it might be the case, but it is not necessarily all the time that this is the case. And a good measure is to consider how often does it happen. So, for example, if you've had 3 relationships over the past year, and all of them ended in a similar, badly arranged mess, then as much as those people might be a part of the problem, the connecting link here is you. And this is not to discourage you from trying or to criticize you for your flaws. Rather, it's an empowering idea that if you want to change your circumstance, you should start by changing yourself. You should raise your standards, become more aware of the problems that you might have, try to tackle these problems, and really focus on changing the things you can change. And this is key. There is a prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous that goes something like, please God, give me courage to change the things I can, wisdom, humility maybe, to accept the things I cannot change, and wisdom to know the difference. And the key here is there is an array of things you can do today to make yourself and your life better. If you do, will make your life better, and you should start with that. I know it's not, anything unusual to hear. I think we've all heard it before, this idea that change your perspective and you will change your circumstance, or change yourself and you will change your life. But it truly is where the book starts. So this idea that you first become better yourself, and when you can truly say, I've done my work, then you can see whether or not you can help others, or maybe your community or your country or the world to become better. And of course, this is not the idea of discouraging you from doing voluntary work or acting or activism for the betterment of the world or the planet or your community. Rather, it is a reminder that first and foremost, you should humbly notice where you might be at fault. And this is where Mr. Covey starts his discourse. He invites us to consider, where are we lacking? What faults may we have? Where do we see in our life some shortcomings that could be reconciliated through our own effort, without the third party, without the government, without your wife, husband, without your friends? What can you do today to make yourself better tomorrow yourself? And I find that very empowering. And this is ultimately what I believe is the essence of becoming better at whatever you want to become. Now, the second idea here, very strongly linked to this one, is this idea of personal philosophy, or the paradigm. If you've heard about the paradigm or the paradigm shift, I guess an easy way to convey it, the way I understand it, so please don't quote me on this, is a paradigm is just a sort of a framework, a way of perceiving something to be true or something to be. So maybe my paradigm is I'm a healthy, sporty person, and so I perceive my activities throughout the day through the lens of someone who is sporty and healthy. And so my choices and my decisions and my values are all motivated and sort of interlinked, a part, let's say, of this paradigm idea, which in the long term really determines the way my life goes, the direction that I take, and the activities that I undertake. So, I don't know if you remember, in the first year of this podcast, majority of my work was inspired by Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn was a speaker and a personal development coach back in the 30s. And Tony Robbins is actually his apprentice. He used to be his apprentice. Now, obviously, he's the master himself. But the ideas that Jim Rohn would often point out to were these of personal philosophy, the philosophy of life. And the paradigm or the philosophy, whatever you want to call it, I think it's basically the same. And I perceive it to be the same. So, for example, whatever your paradigm or your philosophy of life is, this will dictate the way you act, the way you feel about the things around you, the things you will do, and the values and goals that you will be wishing to pursue or fight for, or maybe even die for. And so these are very important areas to consider. And it's interesting, obviously, if you are a listener of this podcast for a while, maybe you've already had the chance to consider these things, because again and again we sort of come back to those ideas. But I don't think people often, or maybe not often enough, consider, especially at their younger, ish age, consider what drives them, what motivates them. And there is no right or wrong. I mean, of course, if your motivation is malicious, if it's motivation to destroy someone or something, or hurt someone or something, or yourself for that matter, then potentially, we can argue whether or not that's not the best solution. But those, marginal examples aside, majority of us is going through life with some values and philosophies of life and paradigms in mind and in the heart, let's say. But how many of us actually know what are their paradigm and philosophies? And maybe it's a question for you. Do you know what is your mission statement, sort of? I don't know if you remember mission statement or vision statement and values, purpose statement. These are all statements that usually are used in business jargon or in the business space or brand space. And these basically reflect the company's or the individual's vision for the future, the perception of the mission they have, the purpose of existence, and the values, the goals, the aspirations that they have. And the vision, mission, and purpose, whatever you want to call it, the philosophy of life, is something that we all do and we all have, even if we don't realize. So this is a good moment maybe for a second right now. Think about your philosophy of life. Maybe try to name 5 values that you stand for. So, for example, and I'll share with you something very personal here, but I won't go into too many details. But this is basically something that I've written following one of the habits, which was about the writing out of your mission statement. And I also thought about the 5 sort of qualities or 5 values that I believe to be the most important in my life. And so these are integrity, resilience, kindness, honor, and curiosity. And just by writing them down and thinking through them, I can see how much easier it is to make some decisions going forward. If I perceive myself to stand for the idea of integrity in a sense of I will say what I will do and I will do what I will say, then it's much easier to stay away from lying or to over-promising, because I can fall back onto my value ladder, let's say, and ask myself internally whether this is something in line or against, in conflict, let's say, with my philosophy of life. So I don't know if you remember, there was an episode a while back about the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And Frankl was basically a psychologist that was one of the Jews that had to go through the atrocities, the awful experience, the worst of all, I think, I guess somewhere on the spectrum there, of experiencing the concentration camps, right? And what he observed and then wrote down in his work and then even taught for some time was that people that had a purpose, that felt a mission, a reason to live, were more likely to stay alive and to survive these, tremendously awful conditions. While those that didn't have these guiding principles or didn't know what they stand for, or maybe they lost the reason to live, they literally lost the purpose to life, were more likely to die or, to sort of to give up, and their bodies would then give up as well. And this is obviously quite a morbid area of this idea, but the idea stands is my question to you, what is your paradigm? What is your life philosophy? What are your values, maybe? And an interesting thing here to note is the moment you recognize them, the moment you do read the book, work through it, and realize what are your values, ideas, missions, and purpose, is that everything else in life will be then much easier to organize, to prioritize, to reflect this set of ideas and thoughts for you. So this is actually why Mr. Covey points it out as the second sort of the part of the second habit, and the third habit is organizing your schedule and so on, because the moment you know what's most important and the moment you know what's not important, it's much easier to organize your tasks throughout the day to reflect that priority, that value-based priority ladder. And this is why it's important and useful to consider what is your paradigm. And finally, on this point, I don't think it's an overstatement to say, if you want to be a conscious being and if you want to make conscious choices, well-informed decisions in your life, then it would be better for you to know what drives you, right? So it's nothing bad, for example, if you're driven by monetary gain, or if you're driven by the need to be famous, whatever that is. This is not a space to judge. I'm in many ways, my motivations are also surrounding, for example, the monetary gain more on the financial stability front. I do consider it to be a big part of my everyday work to ensure that me, my family, my future family, and my loved ones are safe financially to the degree that I can offer them that security. The thing is, though, it's better that you know what you're driven by than not, right? Because by knowing the problem or by knowing motivation, at least you can consciously decide whether or not you agree with it and whether or not you want to do something about it. While if you're willfully blind or you just don't know because you've never thought about it, then you're more likely to stumble and to not really know what are you doing and why are you doing it. So, it always comes back to this idea of self-awareness. And as this podcast is very much so about mindfulness and self-awareness all year long, and then this is one of the activities that I would encourage you to engage with. Now, in terms of the habit, as I said, the one that I really wanted to share with you is the idea of beginning with the end in mind. And, I've chosen it purposefully, of course, right? Obviously, this is the beginning of our season, but at the same time, I have the end in mind because I know what I would like you to get out of this season. I know, for example, what I would like you to get out of this episode. So the script, or sort of the notes that I've taken beforehand, were motivated by this idea of where I want you to be mentally after you've finished listening to these 45 minutes, let's say, of my audible experience, right? My audible monologue. So the idea of beginning with the end in mind is very tightly wound around this philosophy of values and your paradigm shift or your paradigm. Sorry, it's early in the morning and I haven't yet finished my coffee. So here, the idea of beginning with the end in mind, I think, would be best summarized by pointing out this. Whenever you start something, you start it for a reason. And so if you can tell what the reason is, and if you can tell and potentially write down, for me, it always helps to write things down when I'm sort of going through the motion and trying to figure out a way to do things or plan some new project. If you can tell what the reason for it is, and if you can tell what the goal of the activity is, then you know where you want to go. It's like pointing on a place in a map and saying, this is where we're going. And now the question is, how do we get there? And, in planning, for example, if you were to plan out, I don't know, a building or a plan for business or school year plan or a plan for a trip with your love, which I think is it's funny how often people only make an effort of planning when they're talking about vacations, while not many of us actually plan our work or school or aspirations, goals related fields. Personally, I'm a big planning lover. I've already showed you the notebooks that I've been using, and I definitely recommend if you do want to get more into planning well. Stephen Covey actually has a great tool inside the book that is amazing for planning and scheduling your time around things. But to the point, when you know where you want to go, you can walk backwards from that end that you have in mind and figure out what steps, what activities, what things, what people you need to encounter, explore, engage, do to achieve that goal, to get there, right? To achieve that result, or to attain success on the moral front, whatever that means to you. And this is a big, big part of any project, work related or not, whether it's, even just structure that you have to your day. And we've talked about it so many times on this podcast, right? You can either be the master of your day, the master of your ship, as they say, and you can plan it so you have a good day, or you can sort of freestyle and hope to have a good day. And I'm not saying you won't have a great or good or wonderful or bad day if you've not planned it. Of course, the odds are somewhere there, but you can enhance your likelihood of having a good day and sort of mitigate the risks related to the chaos of life if you do plan out some of your activities, if not all. And, we've talked about it so many times. A schedule is not your prison, right? If you have a schedule that works for you well, if you like your schedule, then you won't feel restricted by it. By all means, you'll feel empowered. That's what I feel, let's say. I try to keep a certain activity routine, especially in the morning, which over the long term allows me to have a good day. Even if I didn't have a good day every day, majority of my days are good, at least because I know that I'm moving towards the goal this philosophy of my life has determined to be a valuable one. So, two more things that I would like to touch here in terms of that habit is the idea, which was very powerful for me, and I remember I've encountered it before, and I read this book before a long time ago, and I remember I was also taken aback by this, but now being a bit more mature, let's say, I found it very, very powerful, is this idea of considering the end of your life. What would you like to have on your tombstone? Or what would you like your friends, your family, your coworkers, your community members say at your funeral in their speech? You know, what kind of a person would you like to be remembered to be, to remembered as? Or what kind of an employee, what kind of a creative, what kind of an author, what kind of a podcaster, what kind of an individual would you like to be remembered as? What would be your legacy? And I know this is quite a dramatic question, right? But in many ways, I think it isn't, because this will happen inevitably, unless in the next however many years you think you have left, someone will suddenly come up with the medicine to never die, although I'm not sure if that would be the great result of this. But let's assume they don't. So we will all die, right? I think realistically around 60 years from now I will not be here anymore, which in some ways is a bit upsetting maybe, but in some ways it isn't. It is just how things are. But the thing is, what we can, and this is going back to that prayer we've heard, right? Have the courage to change the things you can, and humility to accept the things you cannot change. You can direct your life in many ways, at least to aspire to be remembered, to have the legacy, to be the kind of person you would want others to think you are. And this is nothing selfish to, in a negative sense, to consider, because ultimately I do believe it makes you a better person if you strive to be however you want to be, because being your best self is, as it's called, your best self, right? And maybe you're not for everyone, no one is, but at least you have the ability to direct the way you want your life to be. And so this powerful visualization that Stephen Covey walks us through in the second chapter of the book is surrounding this idea of trying to visualize what kind of things your family members, your community members, your work buddies, and your friends would be saying about you at your funeral. And then, inspired and empowered and informed by these thoughts, these ideas that you had there, you can start formulating your value ladder and your mission statement, and ultimately you can figure out your philosophy of life. And one more interesting thing here that I sort of alluded to when I said those 4 kinds of people that would speak is Stephen Covey points out that we play different roles in life, right? So for example, for me, currently I have a role of a student, I have a role of an employee, I have a role of a creative, podcaster, author, whatever you want to call it. I have a role of a boyfriend, I have a role of a friend to some of my friends, and I have a role of a brother or a son. So these 6 areas, these 6 roles that I'm playing, interlinked throughout my life, let's say, are what in many ways determine the things I do and the way I act and whatever I engage with. So Mr. Covey points out to us that these roles we will play. Someday maybe you'll be a husband or a wife, or someday you'll be a grandfather, or maybe a business owner. And through the lens of these different roles that you are engaging with, you can also see your values and your philosophy of life changing for these areas. And this is very powerful, you know. What kind of a father would you like to be? That's a good question to ask yourself, right? Or what kind of a business owner should I be? Or what kind of a podcaster should people perceive me as, you know? So these are the ideas, the thoughts that go into this second habit from Mr. Covey's book. Now, to close off, because I think by now I should let you just purchase the book and start reading and working with it yourself, I would like to invite you to this little activity. As I said earlier, there were a few ideas that maybe you've considered, and the invitation for this week that I'd like you to take forward and hopefully engage with if you're feeling inspired is to consider what would it take to achieve a success in whatever area of your life you would like to, you know, become better at or achieve success in. And start by writing the end goal down, the reason for it and the result that you would pursue. And then on a piece of paper, try to figure out the steps, maybe the activities you need to do, the people you need to meet, the skills you need to acquire to get there. So, for example, for me, I will just give you an example of my dissertation project I did. I wrote down the project scope, the project plan. I wrote down the question that I'm trying to answer and the sort of the end goal being I have the answer for this question and I have a set of data to show for it. And then I wrote down a list of different methods and different theories that could bring me closer to answering this question. Of course, in academic work, this is going to be always slightly different than in practical everyday life, but the idea is the same, right? Figure out what would you like to change. It can be a big change or a small change. Figure out the reason for it and the result. And the reason is important because reason adds emotion to it. So you'll be more motivated to pursue things that you think are meaningful to you to pursue. And once you have the reason and the result in mind, write down the different steps and maybe just walk back and see if you can do something this week to make it closer. Maybe you can do something this month to get closer to your goal and so forth. So yeah, I think that's a good way to start, to begin with the end in mind, your next big change, adventure, habit. Other than that, as I said, if you're interested, check out this book. I will put the link below as well for you to find it online. I'm very excited to be back for this new season. I hope that you'll enjoy it as well. And hope this episode was inspiring. Have a wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.